All right, our speaker today. We are thrilled to have Jimmie Killingsworth, who is known by all of us as the most amazing musician who played last week. If you were here, give it up for Anam Cara. Holy cow, they were amazing. Well, I just found out just now, it's not in your bio, Jimmie, but he was the associate pastor at Unity of Lubbock. So he's,
really?
Yes. So he's got the real deal. You know, his wife gave me the secret. And he's going to talk about Epiphany, which, you know, in the Christian thing is when the kings showed up, which has all kinds of deep symbolism of three and what they brought and all of that. It's very, and I have done a talk about that, but he's going to do a talk about secular epiphany. And I'm going to let him explain that when he talks to us. But he is also, besides an associate pastor of Unity, he is Professor Emeritus of English from Texas A&M University. And he's an amazing musician who I have played with, and he's just amazing. And he's the author of many books and articles about American literature, rhetoric, and the environment. His most recent books, he turns his attention to nature writing and the human experience of the natural world. And from that work arises today's talk of secular epiphany. Jimmie, come on up, buddy.
Thank you, Jenny. Thanks, everybody, for having me to talk with you today. I'm very pleased to be here. I've been here many times playing music, and this is my first talk, and I'm very, very glad that you're here to listen to me. Thanks so much. I'm going to start with a story, and then I'm going to tell another story. And then at some point, I'll stop telling stories and try to see what the connection is among them, but I don't promise anything in that regard. And the first story I'm going to tell is a little bit about my wife, Jackie, and I'm not sure I would have told it if I had known she was going to be here today. But I'm going to go ahead with the plan, okay? Back in October, Jackie and I went up to Monte Vista, Colorado to see the cranes when they were just coming in. And crane watching is a little bit of an obsession with me, not as much as it used to be, but bird watching is a total obsession, and I'm going to be referring to it a lot today, if you'll bear with me. But we went up to see the cranes, and we're driving along the road. It's a little bit too light, and the cranes haven't begun to come in, so we're looking for other things. And here comes a flicker, flying right toward the car, and he kind of veered off, and we saw it land in this little patch of trees. And so Jackie backed the car. She's driving. She backs the car up. I'm looking for the flicker in the tree. And she goes, "Oh my God, owl." And she stops the car. And there's a great horned owl sitting there, about maybe 2 feet higher than the car, and about 10 feet away.
Oh my God.
And so she leans forward and she's got her little camera. And I'm leaning over like this from the passenger seat and watching it. And I'm making up the narrative, you know, because that's what I do. And the sacred flicker led us to the owl, and we got our best view of the owl ever, or something like this, you know. And she's just going snap, snap, taking a video, and then I hear she's talking. And what she's saying is, "Thank you. Thank you." And then she puts the camera down and just goes, "Thank you." And then she's just driving off, going, "Thank you." And I thought, wow. You know, because if anybody knows my Jackie, you'd be surprised by this a little bit, maybe, because she's a scientifically educated, very unsentimental person. And yet, this owl had reduced her to a puddle of gratitude. And there we go. Now, I might have been a little alarmed by this, folks, but I've seen it before.
Jimmie.
Oh, there's the owl. Peace.
Just got
The
this
owl.
today from Kathleen. There it is. The owl abides.
It's an owl. It's an owl day. Anyhow, we left the owl behind and drove on, and I'm thinking, Jackie has just experienced an epiphany that I've had a few times in my life. And I call it an epiphany. I'll come back to why I call it that. But let's just think of it as a phenomenon for a moment. Something happens. Okay? Now, the first time it happened to me was at Hilton Head Island. I grew up in South Carolina, and my dad used to take us down there for summer vacation sometimes. And I was about 18 years old. I just started college. And I went down for Christmas vacation, and Dad took the family down to the beach, and we're down there. And of course, I'm way too intelligent and too intense for my pathetic little middle-class family. And so I'm going to take the bike out, and I'm going to go out and have some experiences. And so off I go, and I'm up at the golf course at a lagoon. And there's this lagoon there, you know. And I'm standing by. I get off the bike, and I'm just standing by the lagoon, just feeling my superiority, you know. And I'm watching this stump. For some reason, my attention focuses on this stump across the pond. And I'm looking at it, and something seems wrong, then all of a sudden, its wings rise up, and it flies off. It was a great blue heron imitating a stump. And I was there going, thank you. Thank you. It was flying out over the dune. As I say, I've seen this before. But at the time, I didn't have any concept of what it was or anything. And so I began, to think about that moment a lot and similar moments to it. From my childhood, some moments like that. Going hunting with my dad when I was about 6 years old. And he shot this bird, and he put that still warm bird in my hands. And I looked down at his feathers. Interlaced feathers, and I felt the warmth from that bird, and I just thought, whoa. And so that was maybe one of the early times. That was during a time, my dad never was a hunter much, but we moved to Oregon when I was a kid from South Carolina, and he was in the service, and he did things, he had time to do things he didn't ordinarily have time for later, and hunting was one of them. He took me hunting, and so to be in that magical place. To me, Oregon was always the place of magic. We could see Mount Shasta from our back door. And we went hunting a couple of times, but holding that bird. It was a ringneck pheasant. It was an amazing thing. The other amazing thing on that trip, by the way, was the dog from down the road. I'd never seen a Labrador Retriever at work. I'd only ever seen it with a ball, but seeing it swim after the birds that had been shot, and things like that, I was totally amazed. So you're already in a state of amazement sometimes, and then it just kind of crystallized. I'm sitting at the kitchen table, waiting for that, during that same period, waiting for my lessons to start because my mother was teaching me to read. I was in the second grade. I couldn't read. I've been overcompensating for that ever since. But moving from South Carolina to Oregon, these kinds of things happen sometimes, from the lowest rated school system to one of the highest. So my mom was teaching me to read, and we're sitting there at the table. She gets up and goes over to the sink and says, wait a minute, come here. We look at it, was early in the morning before school, we looked out the back, and there were some fields down there, some kind of grain fields that you could see from our house up on the hill. And there was what looked like a big dog running across. And she said, that's a wolf. And I sort of went, and Mom and I watching the wolf. I don't think it was a wolf. It might have been a coyote or a big dog. But she said it was a wolf, so okay. It didn't matter. The point was, there we were standing there, watching it run across. And the experience of that sort of moment can be as deep as any experience you'll ever feel. So this is what I'm thinking about, the phenomenon. What am I going to do with the phenomenon? Well, I went back to college. And I read an essay in an English class I was taking by Loren Eiseley. You may have heard of him. He was a scientist. And he wrote a book with a bunch of essays in it about just his experience as a scientist, going out and doing field work and stuff. And there was one about his doing field work along the Platte River, and at the end of the day, he was bone tired, and he lay down in the shallow river. It was about a foot deep, and just floated. And he describes the sky and what it looked like. And he describes being one with the river. And that, I went, oh, that's it. And I love this because at the time I was a scientist too. I was studying chemistry, and I said, that's it. That's the feeling. And I saw that. And then nothing, for a couple of years. And eventually what I learned was that I switched over to literature, and I'm reading literature. And in modern literature, there was a term for these sorts of moments. And the term was, among these neo-Catholic literary critics that I was reading, who were reading neo-Catholic writers like T.S. Eliot and Flannery O'Connor, the term was epiphany. And what that epiphany is defined very, very well in the Simpsons movie, which I watched with my grandson the other day. And in there, Homer falls in, when he moves to Alaska, he falls in with an Inuit shaman. And he eats some mushrooms or something, and then he needs to get back to his family. And she says, before you can get back with your family, you have to have an epiphany. And he goes, okay, what's that? And she says, it's a sudden insight or realization, that changes the course of your life in some way. Now, that changing the course of your life, my little epiphanies, they weren't that way. Maybe. But I began to call these things epiphanies, and since I was raised a Baptist, I didn't know the term. Because I didn't know that, for example, today is the Feast of the Epiphany in the church calendar. And Jenny and I worked that out so we could give this talk on that day. But I didn't know that. And I thought it was a literary term. I thought these literary critics made it up. They made up a bunch of terms. But I knew what it was, and I got the idea. And then I could begin to look for it. First, I went where they talked about, to T.S. Eliot, especially his poems, Four Quartets. And I read Flannery O'Connor's stories. And there's almost always in these stories, they'll be going along kind of mundane or something, and then everything changes. Everything kind of goes up to the metaphysical level, And that moment is the moment of the Epiphany. And it's metaphorized, of course, in the star, the Christmas star, right? And there are your magi's. I've always pictured them out in the desert, At night, they're out there with their various kind of calculating devices and all looking up into the skies. And then they go, whoa, look at that. That star is God. Seeing God, that's another way that you hear epiphany defined. Seeing God. Now, if you don't believe in God, or you have a problem with the idea of God as having enough agency to affect you on earth, then what would be the secular version of the Epiphany? And that's what I started asking myself many years ago. And I did a lot of reading. I started collecting secular epiphanies, and writing in poems and things like that, and thinking about it more and more. It was about that time that Epiphany came into current use, maybe about 20 years ago. I'm talking to my sister on the phone. She says, I was thinking about you and Kathy, that's our other sister, the other day, and I had an epiphany. You had a what? I had an epiphany. Maybe I'm not using that word right, she said. She said, but I had a kind of what? Insight. Yeah, you're using it right. And I'm going, because I'm writing this big thing on epiphany, and I'm kind of grr about that. And then I begin to hear it like on the TV show House. Did you ever watch that show? It was about a doctor, and he had this phenomenal capacity to nail a disease when nobody else could. He could diagnose things that nobody could. And it almost always happened in what he called an epiphany. That the answer would suddenly come to him. Now that's the kind of problem-solving epiphany, if you will. You got all the pieces of the puzzle, and then suddenly, boom. You often hear that if you sleep on it, you wake up, boom, it'll come together. That's a different kind of epiphany than what I'm talking about, although it's very real. And a similar in the sense that it's a sudden thing that hits you, you know. My favorite article about that kind of epiphany is called The Eureka Principle. It's by Isaac Asimov. And he talks about Archimedes in there. Archimedes had himself a problem. King wanted to know how much gold was in his crown. And he didn't have any way of measuring that, you know. So he goes to the baths and he's thinking about it. And he gets down into the tub and the water overflows. And right then, boom, it comes to him. The buoyancy principle of measuring volume, okay? And he stands up and what does he say? Eureka. I found it, or I discovered it. And that's another one of those kind of sudden things, but to me, that's not the sort of epiphany I'm dealing with. The point is that once the word enters current usage, it goes all ways that you can't control. You know, that it's going to go different ways. It's become such a cliche these days, epiphany, that I go to a dermatologist named Epiphany Dermatology. You know? I mean, give me a break, you know. So the question is, why am I even still talking about that? It's because even if epiphany is not the word that I'm ultimately going to want, the phenomenon is still there. The experience, the kind of experience I'm talking about. Before I go on, I was just wondering if any of you had any comments or questions about this so far, or if you have, if this resonates with you, if you have an epiphany experience you'd like to tell us about, we could take a few minutes and do that. Yes, Jimmie.
Well, I suspect everybody has. You're reminding me of a moment. I was sitting by a lake in Maryland, just sitting quietly. After maybe 10, 15 minutes, I realized there was a duck sitting like 10 feet from me, and it was stunning. It's just a mallard, you know, but the moment was absolutely stunning, and I'll never forget it.
That's right. It's the never forgetting, I think, is another element of this experience that I'm talking about. That's so good. Yeah, Bill?
Real quick, one of my epiphanies would be when I was not paying attention. I was probably reading poetry or something, walking through the woods, and a female elk mama charged me right up like that. Wow. And I had no idea how big elk are until then. I couldn't tell the story. I survived. But it just, bam, like, wow, now I know where life is. Also that there's another being there that really, you know, I probably don't mean more to that being than everything else, you know, and that being is concentrated on itself and probably its baby, probably hiding, you know. Yeah, that was an epiphany moment.
That's good. That's good. That, you know, the idea of being jerked out of a normal state of life. Yeah. That state of inattention where I'm walking along reading a book of poems in the woods, you know, that state of inattention. I mean, your attention is fine for the poems, but not for your surroundings, right? Yeah. And suddenly you're jerked out of it. That's another element of this experience that I'm talking about. Anybody else? Yes, please.
I think my first experience was I was sitting in the backyard of this suburban house and lots of grass and flowers and stuff, and I was reading A New Earth.
Oh yeah.
And he was talking about us, everything is connected in one, and at first I was like, what the heck is this?
Whatever.
And then I asked, wait a minute, what is oneness? And it was this moment I look out, my gaze like softened, and it seemed like the moment I took a breath, the external took a breath with me. And it just changed everything.
That's beautiful.
I thought I made it up.
Yeah. No, you didn't make it up. It happens to people. It really does. And that the other idea is the idea of looking, of seeing with new eyes. That's another element, you know, that you all are bringing to this, right? You're seeing things with new eyes. And so that's another element of this phenomenon that I'm calling epiphany, even if it is the name of a dermatologist. Anybody else, please?
I have a question.
Uh-huh.
When Paul was blinded, was that an epiphany?
Absolutely. Paul was, and that's a kind of reverse. I had the sight, but I had to be blinded because the things that okay, this is the Damascus Road experience for those of you who aren't familiar with the Christian literature. Paul, Saul, as he was known, had been a persecutor of the early Christians and had held the cloak of Stephen while he was stoned to death. For example, Saint Stephen, whose day just passed not too long ago. Okay, so he was known as a Jew who was anti-Christian, persecuting the Christians, was probably connected with some rabbinical sect. He was going to Damascus, I don't remember why, and he was suddenly struck blind, and he heard the words of God asking him why he had been persecuting his people. And at that moment, Saul became Paul, which is Jewish to Greek, by the way. It's the same name. But he becomes a Christian at that point and becomes one of the great, evangelists of the Christian religion. That has elements of the Epiphany. It's very interesting, though, because it's like almost everywhere in the Bible. And again, I'm from the place that I think it was Flannery O'Connor or Faulkner called the Bible Haunted South. So don't get me started, But it's interesting because mostly in the Bible, when you're talking about having a vision, having a revelation, the term comes from the Bible. The scales fell from my eyes, and suddenly I could see. Well, Paul was blinded. So his was sort of a reverse of that element. It's very interesting, but it was definitely an epiphany, a sudden realization, okay, that affects the course of his life. Yeah. Anybody else with a question or an experience? Yes, sir, in the back.
Last night I had an epiphany.
All right, how timely.
It's sort of like for a couple of decades. Well, okay, I'm on Facebook and it comes up about computer dating. Well, it's been a couple of decades ago that I did do that. That worked out good. But so I get on these couple different sites, and I don't know what the hell I'm doing, but there's this kind, that kind. And the site that I connected with was for people like under 50 years old. I didn't know what I was doing. I'm on the wrong site. I'm not on the old people's site, like somebody I'm supposed to. So I got on it, and wow, in a matter of 10 minutes, it's like I'm getting all these replies. Oh, 10 minutes, it's like 20 women. A woman who's like about the oldest woman on it, quite younger than myself. Yeah, we really hit it off. And our compatibility and whatever, so.
The scales fell from your eyes? Yeah. Well, congratulations, may I say, first of all. But really, though, this is another idea that gets connected with the Epiphany, is the entering into a realm that is totally new to you. Right. You know, how you talked about back there, when you looked up, it seemed to open, like the oneness was just there, it just came flowing in. And that's it's like a wholly different, the world has changed, it has shifted somehow. Even if it's just a small amount, it is shifted in some way. Now you had a point, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I had a little help with my epiphany from LSD.
Oh yeah, it's known for that, yes.
And I was at a concert in Byron, Georgia, and everyone was stunned. And I was sitting there amidst all these amazing strangers. And I thought, I wonder what it's all about. And suddenly I was out of my body, looking down on myself in the crowd, and I saw my hand reach up and touch someone.
Amen.
Well, now on that one, the idea of removing yourself from being in it, okay? There's something about that. I don't quite have a handle on it, but that's kind of what we're talking, I mean, the out-of-the-body experience. We're all familiar with the descriptions of those. I got to think that those are certified epiphanies, almost always, because this other thing, I've never forgotten it. It's indelible. It stays with you, like that wolf that my mom and I saw. I can still see its legs running, you know, and it stays with you that way.
It's like you have a God perspective for a moment,
It's like you shifted into the God
and
perspective.
you can see everything and how it's connected.
And that's the same way as realizing the oneness all of a sudden. Yes, sir.
Mine was pretty classical. In 1990, I was talking to my girlfriend in Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, and we talked for an hour, and of course, $1,000 phone bill at that time. But when I hung up, I said, "What is love? What is love? What is love?" And the divine answered, there was a robe way out there, just no body in it, just a robe, with a cowl like a monk would have. And it got closer and closer. I became more and more ecstatic to the point that I went to emptiness and void, non-existence. And that was memorable.
Oh, yeah, I guess it was. But you know, that what you said, one word you used was ecstatic. Okay, so we are talking about ecstasy here. And it's because I always thought of ecstasy as a kind of explosion, you know, that all of a sudden, you know, like that. And to me, that moment where everything changes all of a sudden, okay, whether it's you come up for a God perspective, a momentary God perspective on your LSD, or because you've been reading something that says everything is one, and you look up and what's that all about, and then it is, okay, that's an ecstatic moment. That's a moment. And what do you all think of as ecstasy? I mean, to me, it's really about the self, the ego releasing, and all of the burdens of the ego drop away at that moment. Okay, and so the ecstasy is like, I'm not Jimmie Killingsworth, who has these responsibilities and this body to take care of, increasingly a problem. No, I'm not that guy. I am the guy looking at the bird. And that bird and I have a magical relationship. And we may as well be God, because it's just so wonderful. Okay? Thank you, bird. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think part of it's before the words, that we don't define things, we just experience it as the vibration, if you will.
You know, that's really good too. And as a guy who spent my entire life cultivating and studying words, you have to admit, and I mean, there are theories that human beings can't think without words. You know, there are these. I don't buy that though. I think that we think through our emotions. We think through the vibrations, as you say, that come out. We receive inputs that we have no idea what they are. And probably in these moments of ecstasy, we're feeling an inrush of those moments, those things that make us, special to ourselves, but not special to ourselves. What makes us really special in the moment of ecstasy is that we are free. We're free. And the ultimate freedom is from ego.
There was a time I thought about ecstatic states a lot. I used to sing, and I noticed that with the breathing and stuff, I would get ecstatic pretty quickly. And I also at that time used to spend a lot of time in these mountains around Bisbee, these little mountains, and Bisbee, Arizona. And I kind of became convinced that the wild animals live constantly in a state of ecstasy, even as they experience things like death or fear or whatever. So that, I've always wondered about that.
Phil, that's really interesting. What led you to think? Are there any other details that led you to think?
Because of their total engagement. I was sitting next to this little pond, just a little bitty pond, and there was this little gopher snake. Not gopher snake, garter snake, little bitty garter snake, and there was this little, really small frog, like the size of a tree frog. And we're all at the pond, and I'm going, oh, isn't that cool, you know? The snake's there, the frog's there, everybody's happy, whatever. Suddenly, the snake moves at the frog, and the frog takes off, and it just, the whole thing, I mean, I'm in ecstasy watching it. It seemed like their total engagement was so profound that even though they were the frog, I'm sure, was experiencing fear, some kind of predation for the snake, for sure. But I think they were in ecstasy, and part of the reason I'm convinced is I started noticing that in my own life, still, I experience profound sadness in a state of ecstasy. I don't experience rage there these days. What else? Things that I would not normally think as ecstatic experiences, if I'm in ecstasy and experience them, then I experience them ecstatically. I know when I experience sadness, like I do off and on, in an ecstatic state, it doesn't feel bad.
It just
It
feels like
strong,
another
it doesn't
input,
feel bad.
another emotion on
Even
it.
if I'm crying, or even if I'm wailing, it doesn't feel bad. So that's kind of, makes me wonder about, especially wild animals, if they just stay there.
May I offer just a small reflection on that? I think that the key term, again, I focus on words, sorry, but I think that the key phrase that you used was total engagement. To me, when I talk about the epiphanies of the owl or the great blue heron or whatever, I'm talking about I am totally engaged in that moment with that thing, even though it was just a stump in the case of the great horned owl. There was something about that stump that just drew my attention, as if I already knew that it was a bird, and so I just engaged with it and locked in there in a way that I didn't do, like when I was studying calculus or something like that at the time. I would have to make myself focus on these other things, whereas that thing just drew my focus out of me almost, and that's what, so total engagement. Now, this is a question that mystics have had for years. These epiphanies, or let's just say mystical experiences, oneness with God, oneness with nature, oneness with the universe, where my self disappears into that state. Okay, and that's why I feel released from the ego, because I am so engaged with everything else that I'm just not even there, except as a speck, as a part. There's an article just came out yesterday in the Atlantic that my friend sent to me. And I promised him I would use it today, even though I pretty much said I wasn't going to quote too many articles and things like an academic. But this one was in the Atlantic, and it was by Arthur Brooks. And Arthur Brooks has been writing for years about happiness and what, and how you get there and what it means. And he said that when he was, or I think he was teaching at a university, I don't remember this part, but he knew these students at this university loved to one of the most popular classes at the university was Astronomy 101, the introduction to astronomy. Okay, and why, he wondered, it sounds like dull as dirt to me. So one day he asked one of his students, she was just coming back from that, she says, I love that class. And he goes, well, why? And she goes, well, I sit in there and they start showing these images from telescopes and showing all of the stars and all of these things up there. And exactly, I feel like a speck on a speck, she says. And he says, and that makes you happy? And she goes, oh, yeah. And she says, it's because I go in there all stressed out about a test or about my studies, and I just say, what the hell, I'm a speck on a speck. And so this whole article, this whole column of Brooks's was about how to achieve speckness, more or less. Yes.
Well, and the application of that, I've been doing attending Aaron Gannon's Golden Breathwork for about over a year, and it's this afternoon at 2 o'clock to 4, and I become ecstatic in that. There's usually about 20 people there at Taos.
Breathing. Now, My daughter, who's also here today, could tell you a whole lot more about this than I can, because that's one of her things too. But for me, breathing, when I first started, I started taking yoga about the same time that I was first looking into epiphanies. Even though I didn't have a name for them, I was just beginning to learn the name of them. And I was doing yoga a lot at that time. And he would always, our yoga teacher at the time, who was also a physiological psychologist, would have us, and by the way, I had to have been the first yoga class in East Tennessee. I mean, totally. And this guy was good. But he would have us just sit and breathe for like 5 minutes at the start of every class. And I said, "What are we doing?" And he says, "We're warming up." And sure enough, every time since then I've ever been cold, if I just breathe, just like he showed me, I could warm my body up, But the other thing that he said about the breathing is that he was just constant on it. Nothing happened without remember your breath, remember your breath, remember your breath. That to me is the fullest form of engagement with immediate life. Just the deepest breaths you can take. And it's like you're just breathing in and expanding, yourself. And again, it's an interesting thing about these phenomena I'm talking about, these epiphanies, they're about expanding even though they're a contracted experience often. You've got the one bird. You've got the one person that you tapped on the shoulder in your vision. The one thing, okay? It's kind of like, well, the cliche, what has become a cliche at the time, it wasn't, is T.S. Eliot's poem, Burnt Norton, or East Coker, when he talks about the still point in the turning world. That point right there. And for Eliot, that's God, okay? That's the eternal moment, okay? For us, it's something different. Or it could be something different. But the idea of the stillness when everything is going like this, the speck when everything is going, yes, sir?
I interrupt you.
No, go
I
ahead.
just had a question.
Uh-huh.
In terms of the moment of ecstasy, or the experience of ecstasy in relationship to an epiphany, do you find that the experience of the ecstasy is what brings about the epiphany that then changes the way one would experience things going forward?
That's sort of a chicken or egg question, because I that's really important though. I mean, it could be that you invite the ecstatic state, and that causes you to see the owl in a new way, or the owl just blasts you out. I mean, you were looking for that little flicker, and it's the owl, and wow, no, it's really different. So it could be the experience, or it could be the state of mind that you've, and that, by the way, leads to the next thing I'm going to say, but that's a really excellent way of trying to sort it out, I think. Did you have a question, too?
Well, I just noticed I'm really getting a lot out of this, when three people in a row expressed their epiphany state, they all had a question, like, what is oneness? What is it all about? And it just occurred to me that the asking, and it's kind of related to this, there's an opening maybe, possibly subconscious, but these were conscious questions like, I don't know, maybe an opening for something.
No, the question is the sentence of the opening, right? I mean, it is the way to open yourself to the other person. Unless it's one of those questions like, don't you think that? That kind of mansplaining question. That's not what we're talking about. But somebody says, or that kind of question. Because that's a question of wonder, I think, if I'm not wrong. It could very well be. Okay, just have a few more minutes. Let me try to wrap a couple of things up. First of all,
that has a question.
oh, sorry. Go ahead, man.
Go ahead.
Are you talking to me?
Yes.
Okay, I have a question. Do you think that sometimes an epiphany can be something that kind of grows on you over a long period of time, and then suddenly it gels? That
Absolutely.
I have a dog that I walk outside every night before bedtime, and I would always look at the stars and the universe and that whole thing. And I would always think, people always say that this makes them feel so insignificant. But to me, all of a sudden one night, it came to me, no, this makes me feel honored to be part of this whole huge, wonderful, incomprehensible thing, and so that was something that sort of grew, and then all of a sudden it just wham, got me, and I've never seen it.
No, I think that these things can grow. And then there's
Can you repeat what she said?
what she said was, do I think that epiphanies can be something that is a process that grows? She was talking about walking a dog over a period of time and doing these things, these everyday kinds of things. And at some point, if you're a speck on a speck, especially if you're thinking in terms of the sort of ego that our culture, wants you to have, if you're thinking in those terms, chances are a speck on a speck will make you feel insignificant. But by repeated meditation on that thing, it can also make you feel one with everything. So it takes a turn in order to think one way rather than the other about the speck on the speck. And those moments of turning might be what we call the epiphany.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Okay, I want to just mention what is probably the most famous epiphany in American literature was in Ralph Waldo Emerson's Nature. And he was talking about walking across, well, he's on Boston Common, but he doesn't say, he said, walking across a bare common one day, my head bathed in the beautiful light. He said, I suddenly felt like a transparent eyeball. I felt like a transparent eyeball. Now, his friends made incredible fun of him for that. Christopher Pierce Cranch did a very famous picture of this eyeball walking across Boston Common with a little hat on it, And, but that's it. That's suddenly, everything is just pouring a transparent. You see, but you see like everything at once. There's so many things coming in at once, and yet it all just flows in. Now, Emerson also thought that if you search deep enough within yourself, the self that you would find was the God self. Okay, and a lot of people have thought that since and before, but that was one of his thinking. So that for him to feel this upwelling of oneness with everything was the essence of the God feeling. So even the owl could be seeing God in that sense, you see. And so even the owl experience. But the last thing I want to say is, can we experience a perpetual epiphany? Most mystics complain that the mystical state is so ephemeral, comes and goes. And I think that's probably true of most epiphanies too. But if we did, what would it be? It could be enlightenment, okay? When you are just open and it's just flowing and you're flowing in it all the time. There's another way. I want to think about it as a way of inviting the epiphany or whatever, and I call it praying with open eyes. And I think, go back to my first story about my Jackie, when she's going, thank you, thank you, thank you. I mean, that's a prayer, okay? That's a prayer of gratitude, all right? Praying with open eyes. So if we may, what I'd like to do here before we have our last music is take just a moment to pray. Now, you can pray with your eyes open or closed. Just make it a prayer of gratitude today if you could, okay? If you could just pray to yourself about the things that make you want to go, thank you, okay? So let's join together right now.